let the tambourine. I'm going down to the bottom. Let the tambourine. I'm just to rain my tambour. Let your tambourine.
Actually, it's happened. It was Troy Davis. You know, one of the many times he was up for execution. I was the op-ed editor at AJC, and I was researching that case. And I figured I would just go back and look at all the other executions in Georgia. And all of a sudden, in 1938, there were 6 executions in one day. And they were all black. And it just intrigued me, trying to find out what happened. I thought maybe it was one single crime. But it turns out it was 3 different crimes. And I thought for sure the governor at the time had to be Gene Talmadge. Because everybody, I think most people in Georgia realized what an outward racist he was. But it turned out it wasn't Gene Talmadge, it was E.D. Rivers. E.D. Rivers was the New Dealer. He was the devout New Dealer, the Roosevelt's guy, who everybody had always portrayed as being a progressive. So that intrigued me even more. And I started doing more research, and I found out he was actually a very active leader of the Klan, the KKK. So I had no idea the Klan was even headquartered up on Peachtree Street. So I really didn't know anything about the Klan, but it turns out they had this giant building up on Peachtree Street. It was this big corporate entity. It wasn't just a bunch of hooligans running around burning boxes. And it was, as a matter of fact, the head of the Klan, it was kind of like an extremist think tank. They were constantly writing books. They were writing speeches, brochures. Here's the Imperial Wizard of the Klan, Howard Michael. This is a book he wrote just about Catholics.
About Catholics?
Catholics. So I don't know how he got 300 pages of hate about Catholics, but he somehow put the book out about it. I had no idea they were really so anti-Catholic, but they were just rabidly anti-Catholic. And by the way, he was a dentist, and he flunked out of dental school. What was his name? Hiram Evans. Hiram Wesley Evans. And he was in Texas, and the local Klan in Texas, there was a bellhop at a local hotel who was allegedly philandering with a white woman. They grabbed him, held him down, and put acid on his forehead, KKK. So Hiram Evans moved quickly up the ranks, corporate ranks, and they transferred him to Atlanta, and he moved to kind of a nice house up on Peachtree so he could be close to the office. He was going to have a long commute. So the whole idea of going into work every day to do what he did, this is kind of bizarre. They were a big institution in Atlanta. They were the tourism that they brought. They had their annual convocation, spelled with K. Everything had to be spelled with K. Even some of the literature, it's called the Courier. It's their local newspaper came out.
What year?
This was in 1935.
Okay.
The Klan in the 20s got huge, absolutely huge, all over the country, not just South. In fact, it got so big at one point that there was fear that there was going to be a takeover, a political takeover through the ballot. And you would see stories in places like Ohio where everybody on the Klan slip won. And it really, another person who later did that, in Germany, who actually took over by Democratic means. And they had this sophisticated system of recruiting where they hired recruiters called Klegels, not Eagles, Klegels with K. They would get a percentage of it, had to pay $10 to join. The Klegel would get a commission basically on all those. And at one point they had over 1 million members, and all that money was coming right back to Atlanta, to corporate headquarters. And they went into real estate. They actually bought a college in Atlanta called the University, which is right over Virginia Highlands now. They bought, big office buildings and had this giant millions of dollars coming in and out, but most of it was later squandered. Nobody knows what happened to all the money. So that intrigued me. I felt like I needed to figure out the Klan, because the Rivers, the governor, was very much a Klansman. And they, in addition to hating Catholics and many other groups, there was this weird scientific strain. They loved, eugenics, sterilization, forced sterilization. They were actually even, they loved euthanasia. It's great. And so you had this former dentist pushing all these scientific theories linked to racism. That's when it really starts to get scary, man. When you've got all of these put together. And then, under Rivers, you later got the machinery of the state government behind it. And you also got the electric chair, which is also technology. That was supposed to be the humane way to kill people after hanging, which had all those problems that came up. Actually, Thomas Edison helped invent the electric chair, but he recommended that Westinghouse be used for the electricity, because they were in a big battle over which form of electricity was the most dangerous. So Edison said, "I love the electric chair, let's let Westinghouse provide the power." And so they'll come across as the most dangerous. So just to read you something that Hiram Evans wrote about euthanasia. This, like birth control, is another extreme illustration, and no one can say that it is impossible. It is the name given to the proposed practice, ending the lives of incurable idiots, lunatics, and babies that are hopeless monstrosities. This practice has been widely advocated and might be adopted by some states. Any Catholic would be required by his religion to resist it. It's a flaw. So that's one of the many reasons he didn't have Catholics, because he thought it would get in the way of their great program. So when I saw there were 6 men executed at the same time, in the same place, with the same governor, I thought it would be the perfect kind of a laboratory to test the death penalty, to see. Because I remember in 9th grade science, which is about as far as I went in science. I always said you should have the same variables, and here we had it. So what I decided to do was take every one of the crimes, white and black. And another myth is that there was no a white crime at the time, because there was only black crime. So therefore, that's why more blacks had electric chair. But that wasn't true. So I took the white cases and the black, and I tried to follow them from the beginning to the end. And actually, the Smith family here, these are relatives of one of the victims of the white criminal George Marsden, Richard Gallion. It's great to have you all here. It's like reaching back into history. So, and I wish I'd known about you guys earlier when I was writing the book. But Harsh and Gallagher, Land Magazine had a really good picture of them here. They were this month's issue. As you can tell, they're very wealthy, well-dressed gentlemen. Harsh's father was a shoe manufacturer in Milwaukee. Big factory. Very wealthy. Father was a great patriot. In World War I, he said, I'll make shoes at cost, soldiers. I'm not going to charge anything. So he died at a very early age and left his son a trust fund. And they, $500,000 is a lot of money at the time. Harsh. All over the world. Around the world. In fact, he later ended up at Oglethorpe University here in town. And he wrote a freshman essay. And the professor said, you've made this up. Because it was all about India and all these places he had been. Forced him to rewrite the essay. Because he said, there's just no kid your age can know that much about the world. And then Gallagher, it's actually pronounced Gallagher, but as somebody was saying earlier, it's hard to say. Go back to Gallagher. But his grandfather was James R. Gregg, owner of the Atlanta Journal newspaper. Extremely prominent man in town. He was a political movement shaker. And they owned, the wealth actually came from the Inman family, not Gregg. And the Inmans made all their money from cotton and real estate. Newspapers were not very profitable, and are now. So they hooked up together. Oglethorpe became really good friends. And in the fall of 1928, they started drinking, and Gallagher brought a gun out. He had had it at military school. And they figured they'd start robbing people and killing people, including Mr. Smith, for no reason. They had money. And they were, the press, including the Atlanta Journal, who didn't realize who they were at the time, called it thrill killers. And at that time, you probably remember the Leopold Loeb case up in Chicago, where there were just two college kids trying to prove they could commit the perfect murder. And they were represented by Clarence Darrow. Everybody compared them to that. And they were captured kind of. Harsh was shot during the Smith robbery. And he left his pants in a friend's house. A friend talked about it at a cocktail party. And then the word got back to the cops. And instantly confessed. And pointed to Helge as his co-defendant. They tried Harsh. And he was a Yankee, out-of-towner. Of course, he had confessed to it too, so there wasn't much of a trial. He was convicted and sentenced to death. One thing I could really quickly, Georgia at the time was, just give you a picture of what the state was like. It was about 3 million people. 2 million white, 1 million black, which is probably, I'm not sure, actually, if you go further back to like the 1860s, it was pretty close to 50-50 white, black. But then, of course, the migration and all those kinds of things, the white majority actually increased over the years. So, but the other races, out of 3 million people, 518. So, absolutely no diversity whatsoever in Georgia. And I argue that racism kept out all those other races, all the diversity. It actually hurt us economically tremendously, because we're such a closed society. But the education back then was hard, according to the census. The mean was 7 years of education. And then whites at 8.4 years average, and then blacks 4.2 years of schooling. 30% of the state had completed less than 5 years of education, and 56% of blacks less than 5 years. So, out of 3 million people, 50,000 people had college degrees, and of those, 3,000 blacks. So, it's just an uneducated, racist society. I mean, median income is half the national average.
Could you repeat the year?
I'm sorry?
Could you repeat the year that this is?
This is the 1940 census. Right. Most of this happened in 1938, so that's what the closest census was 1940. So, I mean, it's just depressing. Since I grew up in Georgia, to look back on, and then when you go through the public health files, you still have malaria. You had a disease called cholera, which I'd never heard of. Apparently, you only corn. It's a diet of basically corn. And that corn was probably grits or whatever.
Cornmeal.
Yeah, corn. Yeah.
Yes, mixed up.
Right. But that was basically all they were. So, you don't need, you hear about it now in third world countries, you don't hear about it in the U.S. and I don't know if there's any malaria left or not, but malaria was creeping up on the coast. So.
That's why your daddy, you rented with that from Savannah back up here. Yeah. Outside Savannah.
Exactly.
Back up here.
Yeah.
Which would have been Willard's dad.
Right. Exactly.
I was married up there. I lived down there, I was born down there. And it was a second Marine.
Willard was young.
So anyway, that you had Harsh and Gallagher. They had 2 mistrials because his family was so prominent. And in fact, they had a guy named Hoke Smith, former senator, governor, secretary of interior, was literally sitting with him.
I was a Hope Smith High School.
Yeah, Exactly. They had him sitting with him at the table. You know, from day one, so the jury had to look out and say, this is a very prominent family, they own the newspaper. And WSB radio station, by the way. So,
Say that again.
he owned the WSB radio station and the Atlanta Journal. They did not own the Constitution. That is not.
Are they kin to the Cox?
No, they're not kin, they sold to the Coxes.
Oh, okay,
In 1939, actually, the year they had drawn the win premiere.
okay.
So anyway, after 2 mistrials, the prosecutors got together and said, look, if you'll plead guilty, Gallagher will plead guilty, we'll drop the death penalty as harsh. I'm not even sure, I don't know if there's any lawyers in the room, I'm not even sure how they did that legally. I could just drop the death penalty. Because they already been convicted and sentenced to death, and they already had the date, it was only, it was about 2 months away. So they only expected to serve about 3 years in prison. They came out later. They were 1 year. They thought because they had so much between the 2 families, they had enough money to appeal the thing all the way to the Supreme Court and back twice. So, and then what happened was Talmadge got elected governor, and the press had already described these 2 men as millionaires. Even though they may or may not have been technically millionaires, I think the 2 families together probably could have scraped up $1 million. Back when $1 million really meant something. So, anyway, Talmadge was a rural guy. He was a blatant racist, but he represented the little man, the farmers. For him to have pardoned Harrison County was politically hard. Even though there's a lot of evidence he pardoned a lot of other people. So for cash. Anyway, the Talmadge was extremely anti-New Deal. He was elected, he came into office at the same time that the New Deal started in 1933, and hated Roosevelt, hated all of his programs. He made fun of Roosevelt's paralysis from polio. Said something to the effect we need a president who can walk a straight plank. And so as poor as Georgia was, and all this money just pouring down the pipe from Washington, Talmadge kept it out as much as he could, although he did accept money from Tattle Prison, which is where the literature was. And the really interesting thing was he blocked Social Security. So they passed Social Security in 1935, but it didn't kick in until 1940. So they had emergency grants. So go ahead and start getting this money out. It may only be $7 a month, but every other state in the union jumped at it. But the state had to administer. That's the only thing they asked. They didn't even waive the matching money. And Talmadge stood up there to the newspaper and said, if we accept Social Security, we're going to lose our supply of cheap labor, black labor. The blacks will all retire and we'll have anybody to do our cheap workforce. But to think of the fact that he would publicly say that to a newspaper, no shame. So 2 terms he could run for a third. Rivers ran for governor. Rivers had run twice before, 1928 and 1930, on the Klan governor. The Klan was losing its clout all over the country, in part because they had a lot of sex scandals, even though they were very, they pretended to be very religious and very moral, and had this code of ethics, but it was just one sex scandal after the other, everywhere, including Indiana. These northern states probably don't want us to know about. It was just rampant in Indiana, rampant in Ohio. In fact, the founders of the new Klan, this is the second version of the Klan, were shocked because they always thought it was a regional organization. They had no idea it was going to take off the way it did anymore. So, and the Klan also was in the movie business, by the way. They made propaganda movies in Hollywood. So, no, they were non-profit. They're chartered in Georgia. And they eventually got in all kinds of trouble with the IRS. And Georgia actually eventually revoked their charter.
How long did they have that for-profit on?
It started in the early 20s, and then when the Klan started to fade, they moved to Washington in hopes of generating some more interest. And the interesting thing is in the book, one of the most interesting things in the book, the site of the current, of the old Klan headquarters, is now Christ the King Catholic Church. There's even more to it than that, because Hiram Evans, the Klan, and Rivers attended the groundbreaking of the Catholic Church. The Klansmen got furious, booted Evans out of office, said, "How dare you?" So not only did the Catholic Church go up on that site, Hiram Evans ended up losing his job because of it. So I really do believe in relationships. So anyway, Rivers got elected governor 36 on the New Deal platform, even though he was a Klansman. And the interesting thing is, this is a Klan courier in 1935 is attacking Eleanor Roosevelt for pushing equality. And it says, here we are, the Klansmen, out there using every ounce of our energy to combat communism and to maintain white supremacy in this great land of ours, and to protect our womanhood. The wife of the president goes up and delivers an address to Negroes advocating equality.
Is that Klan
Out there.
That's a newsletter?
This is the Klan's internal publication. Yeah. You can find them all over the internet. My kids were kind of creeped out. Every day in the mail, this is the kind of stuff that's showing up in the mail. Do you find it in bookstores? All over the place. So the New Deal was extremely popular. Even though Roosevelt was a white, northern, liberal, by the way, all the Georgia politicians were Democrats, including Representative. Blacks were banned from voting in the Democratic primary. It was illegal to do that up until 1946. So Rivers realized the only way he's ever going to get elected is to hook up with Roosevelt. And Roosevelt needed somebody desperately because Talmadge had been sabotaging everything he was trying to do. So Rivers gets elected, and his inaugural speech in 1937, he made a point which I actually agree with. That Roosevelt was the first president since the Civil War who ever did anything to the South. I mean, they basically burned the South and just let it rot for the next 60, 70 years. And he said, I like the New Deal. I'm not doing this. This is not charity. They owe us war reparations, basically. And so he immediately just goes to Washington. Money starts pouring in. Everything, Social Security. And people started getting their Social Security checks, $7 a month. And there are letters in the Rivers file, which basically they thought it was God. Because they were so poor. And basically been ignored for so long. And they got the $7 check. They said, that's divine intervention. Thank you so much. And he starts building schools, he starts building courthouses, new buildings at Central State Hospital, prisons, everything. And you could hear the Atlanta Constitution in the editorial almost signed. Thank God we're finally in the same country as everybody else, the rest of the United States. Because even a lot of the southern states had accepted a lot of New Deal money. We were just sitting there rotting because of Talmadge we didn't get anything. So the Chatmore prison where these executions occurred opened in 37. Actually, my great-grandfather was the warden shortly before that. Which is another reason I was interested in writing the book. But he was also a Talmadge man, so he was out when the Rivers came. Thank God. You know, 'cause I had a horror that he was the one who oversaw these executions. So, meanwhile, the Harsh and Gallagher didn't really, it's hard to even say he ever spent any time in prison at all. They, like in Millersville, he lived in the warden's apartment. And he was anytime he had a cold, they put him in the hospital. So he was up at Georgia Baptist for months on end. There were a couple times when they caught him down in having picnics on the side of the road with women. Whenever his family needed to talk to him, they would just go meet in Savannah. They would talk to him about business matters. So he did very little time on the chain gang, which at that time was extremely notorious in Georgia. was a book written called I'm a Fugitive from the Georgia Chain Gang, which also became a movie. And the whole world knew about how bad it was. Harsh had a little bit more time on the chain gang, and he ended up getting a nice gig at a prison hospital as a physician's assistant. So they were still, somewhat in prison, but not really. And then you start getting all these killers who are white, and these were literally executed 6 weeks after their arrest. So the trial lasted one day, an afternoon. The jury verdicts will come in 15 minutes later. And all you had to do back then to slow things down was for your lawyer to file an appeal for a new trial, so motion for a new trial. And it had to be anything. You could just say insufficient evidence, but it stopped the clock. And then a judge would have to hold a hearing on it, and then you could actually appeal that to Georgia Supreme Court. But these defendants, the black defendants, weren't even getting, their lawyers weren't even doing that. So if your lawyer didn't file anything, 6 weeks later, you're dead in electrocution. So in the fall of 38, we had just a lot of weird murders, white and black. And they actually lined up 7 defendants for execution on that one day, December 9th. And there were 6 black men and 1 white man. And I'll let you read the book to figure out what happened. We all know what happened. And as I was doing the research, we went down to Tappan Prison for spring break. My kids, that's what they went. They actually have a museum there. It's kind of
It's a swimming pool still.
Yeah. But you actually go in, we had to go to the guard tower, yell out that we were here. And there was a prisoner who had this weed eater. And she told me to go tap him on the shoulder and tell him to cut his weed eater off so they could hear what I was saying to the guard tower. So I walked over there, and here's an inmate. And, excuse me, sir, can you turn off your weed whacker? Please don't whack me with it. So then the secretary takes us back to up to the lecture chair museum. And it's just her, there's no guard. And all of a sudden, there's 5 or 6 inmates who are the painting crew. They're also using the same elevator. So we're sitting around, what kind of small talk do you make? I have my family here, no guard, and they're whistling and whatever. But I went up there and I had done so much research, I instantly recognized everything. It hasn't really changed a bit. The only thing that's changed is there's a picture of Burt Reynolds on the wall, the actor, because they had filmed The Longest Yard there. So you're looking at the somber scene, and all of a sudden there's Burt Reynolds with a football uniform. Nobody actually didn't see the disconnect there. But it actually is a museum. It's open to the public if you ever has plans to down. So, but anyway, that is part of the research. We wanted to find out where were 6 men buried. And a lady, she has a book. It's called The Registry of Inmate Deaths. And she kept holding it back like she didn't want me to see it. And because there actually is a cemetery in Tappan for prisoners. And she had already told us they were in the cemetery. And it says, I finally let her peeked over her shoulder, and it says, Georgia Anatomical Board, which is basically a board created to get corpses for the medical school in Augusta and all the other medical schools. And they had basically transferred all the bodies over there for the medical students. And one of the defendants had specifically asked for a certain Bible verse to be put on his tombstone. And it turns out he has no tombstone. They used him for that, which I thought was another example of this weird mixture of science and racism. And when I got back to the land, I got all the records, and there was not one white body donated to the medical school. So it was just another one of the sad things about this whole story.
And they only had, 24 hours to claim the
Yes,
bodies?
exactly. And one of the defendant's mother, her name was Ruth Perry, she lost all her appeals. Thurgood Marshall actually helped her. And there's a lot of letters here on this microphone between her and Thurgood Marshall. And one of them was really sad. It said, when they finished all the appeals, Thurgood Marshall said, I join you in your song. So she stormed into the Muscogee County Commissioner's meeting and said, I demand that you bring my son back to America. And they said, okay, we'll do it. And of course they broke their promise. So I don't know what happened. She was illiterate, she was more, that was a big expense to move a body from Tampa prison to Columbus. That was a lot of money, she just didn't have it. So, yes.
I'm not really clear on a couple of things. So exactly what crimes did Gallagher and
They killed two store clerks, including their relative. And that was at a drugstore, actually. Do you know where Trader Joe's is?
Yes.
You know that dry cleaner store? It's right across the street. That was where it happened. Yeah, and it looks like a drugstore.
Trader Joe's or
Right by
Yes.
Green High School.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what they did.
Right. And there was another grocery store robbery killing over near Georgia Tech, A&P grocery store. It's not there anymore, but they actually didn't try him on that case. They only tried him on the Smith case.
Now, the woman's son was in prison. Why was he in prison?
Which son now?
The woman who wanted the body to come back, a black woman.
That was a murder at the, do you know Tom's Peanut Company? You still see it, they sell Tom peanuts.
Yeah. Only in little.
It's a small kind of country stores. They had a picnic in Columbus, summer picnic, and they had a white picnic for white employees, black picnic for black employees. They had a bunch of beer left over from the picnic. So Arthur Perry and Arthur Mack were two guys that were, everybody was milling around the fairgrounds, hoping to get some leftover beer. And there was a security guard guarding the beer, because it was going to take overnight to pack it all up. And they kept coming back and asking for more beer, and it turned out the Mack and Perry had a knife, the security guard had a gun, and it was kind of somewhat similar to Trayvon Martin. You couldn't really tell. It was dark. They got in a tussle. They killed the security guard, two black men. And the interesting thing was Thurgood Marshall actually got them an appeal to the Georgia Supreme Court. Georgia Supreme Court threw it out. They said, no, we can't tell who the killer is. There's no way to tell. I mean, they said if the security guard had lived, he probably would have been charged with killing them. That's how confused it was. And so they got another trial. Again, they were convicted and went back to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, we sympathize with your case, but this is for the jury to decide, unfortunately.
Your book reflects these books?
Yes. And believe it or not, there were actually some white people that wanted to do justice, and it could just found a decent lawyer to represent you. Could actually, there was hope that you could get an appeal. But
The 6 men they executed.
yeah,
In one day. What were their crimes?
they were all murdered.
Oh, all murder.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Accused.
yeah, or they were convicted. Well, they were convicted. Actually, I don't know whether they were. I honestly can't say whether the Mack and Perry, whether they were guilty or not, because it's one of those things that.
Nobody knows witness.
Right, I mean,
saw it.
it's dark, you have one person with a knife, the other. The interesting thing was with Perry and Mack, they were shot, they were riddled with bullets during the confrontation. They held the trial 5 days after the incident. They were still riddled with bullets. They were sitting there. Thurgood Marshall, there's actually a picture in here of a telegram that sent Rivers. He said, well, how can you possibly try these people in 5 days and they're riddled with bullets? So then Rivers gave him this real perfunctory reply, but Rivers himself was a lawyer, so he had to have known that was not in any way form of justice. So,
Was that time claim, was that common?
yes. It was, I mean, if you didn't have a lawyer, that's the thing, I mean, you had to have somebody in your corner. You had somebody in your corner like the NAACP in this case. If you had nobody in your lawyer, which was the common, and on your side, stirring up things, it's good as dead if you're black. You kill a white person. There's a standard thing to kill a white person.
My understanding is that during the 30s and the 40s, that there was a large number of politicians that were members of the KKK.
Yes.
Over 50%. Do you reflect on that?
It's funny because they asked Rivers about it when he was governor, and he wouldn't actually confirm that he was a member, but he put the number at 90%.
90.
Right.
Yes.
So,
And they marched on Washington.
yes. In fact, there's a picture in here of Hiram Evans with his robe on in Washington. It was actually on the cover of Time magazine. And one thing I forgot to mention, Rivers, when he got elected governor, immediately put Hiram Evans, gave him an asphalt contract with the state. And he said, you control who sells asphalt to the state, and you also set the price. And you have your own company. It also gets contracts. So at one point, the legislature finally said, hell, here they are. They said, why, what gives you, you're setting the price for your competitors, basically. And one of which was Shell Oil. And they said, I don't understand the business logic of that. And Hiram said, well, my competitors understand the arrangement. But you had to go through him to get, and at this point, there were millions of dollars in New Deal dollars coming down for the roads. So he was making, his tax bill on when the IRS finally got out after was $300,000. And those dollars, 1938 dollars, now today's dollars. And he actually pleaded guilty to an antitrust violation. The defense went after him. And they fined him $15,000. He pulls out a checkbook and writes a check for $15,000 right at the spot. So that shows you how wealthy he was at the time. And that Rivers was actually out around every state contract. There was this guy in the book who I interviewed. He said that his father was an insurance agent, and the insurance on the state capital was $10,000 a year. Rivers said, okay, I'll give you the contract. You give me $5,000. You take $5,000. And that was his share of everything. And there's no way to tell him how much money Rivers got out of this whole thing. He was also selling pardons, big time. He was selling hundreds, if not thousands of pardons. And I don't have any proof that Harsh and Gallagher were paid their way out of prison. But there's every indication that they did. I can't prove it. But there are other people that you can prove. In fact, Ellis Arnold, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, who was governor later, abolished the power of Georgia governor's pardon. Still to this day. If you ever want to know why the Georgia governor can't pardon somebody, it's because of Rivers. And that's really rare too. Most states, the governor has to pardon them. But we have the pardons parole board because that's how bad it was. And in fact, the grand jury told everybody, Fulton County grand jury, if I were you, I'd arm yourself. Because there's criminals, he just wholesale these prisoners out of jail before he left office. So, right, but it got to the point where the Klan, the gangsters, and the governor were all one and the same. In fact, there was the bug. Anybody y'all heard of the bug?
Yeah.
It was an illegal lottery. It was rampant in Atlanta. And a lot of those guys were the ones that got pardoned. But it may actually still exist today because it existed long after the Georgia lottery was passed because they thought that was going to put out of business. But essentially, they were just basically runners on the street. And in fact, I think I'll read you a brief passage of a chapter. Yeah. Because it was such a rampant part of life back then, and it was an accepted part of society. White and black. Had white, a lot of operators in black.
I was under the impression that Georgia Lottery put numbers out of business. No?
No, there was still circus even years later. I'm surprised. I bet if you walked down, if you could find some areas right now, there's probably still illegal water.
Wow.
So I'll read this little section about the book. I like this part because my editor tried to take it out of the book. And I won't. It'd be years before the New Deal programs, pushed and promoted mightily by Governor E.D. Rivers, were beginning lifting the great pall of the 1930s in Georgia. It was really not until the United States entered World War II, late 1941, that the Great Depression would start to fade into memory, leaving behind a permanent remnant of fear in the people who had survived it. Fear that it could always happen again. But even when the times were their darkest, when hopelessness loomed over everything, there were always small bright spots, small moments of happiness and hope. Thousands of people in Atlanta each day would enjoy an inexpensive indulgence in a legal lottery game that was rampant throughout the city. It was everywhere, and according to police, impossible to exterminate. It was therefore nicknamed the Bug. Tickets could be purchased over the telephone or on the street. You could bet as little as a penny. The bets were placed on 3-digit numbers chosen by the customer. The winning numbers could be found in the next day's newspaper in the stock tables. It was usually the middle 3 numbers of daily sales on the New York Stock Exchange, New York Bond Exchange. The Bug was thus a boom for newspaper circulation. Maybe we need to bring it back. Runners were also called riders, who would fill out the tickets, collect money, and deliver the winnings throughout the city, on street corners, at businesses, or even the customers' homes. So a payout for a winning ticket was $500 for every dollar you bet. So even a 10-cent investment could yield $50. The Bug was so accepted around town. Actually, hold on. The odds of winning were estimated at 1 in 1,000, making the Bug a safe bet not for customers for the lottery man. The Bug was so accepted around town that when the operators failed to pay out for winning bets, ticket holders felt comfortable enough to call the police and complain. The cops warned the callers that they were wasting their time and their money with the Bug. The odds were so stacked against the bettors. Atlanta Police Chief M.A. Hornsby said, "You were lucky to win once every 4 years. Even when you win, you're losing." In the evenings after a long day at work, the Bugmen could be seen counting the daily receipts in parking lots on Boulevard Avenue. Like everything in the South town, there were 2 of everything divided along racial lines: black lottery operators and white lottery operators. It was seen as a victimless vice, but it wasn't. Organized crime syndicates, many controlled by former bootleggers. By the way, bootlegging got too crowded, too much competition, they switched to Bug.
What is that word? Bug?
Bug, B-U-G, just like the insect. So,
I've never heard the term coin
yeah.
either. I know.
The inevitable violent turf wars ensued. In December 1936, 3 lottery operators were shot to death on Decatur Street, just a few doors down from Atlanta Police Headquarters. Do you remember where the old jail used to be? Yeah, exactly. Often after their husbands had been assassinated, the wives of the former lottery kingpins would take over their business. They were known as lottery widows. There are quite a few of them around town. The lottery, with its tremendous cash flow, fueled police corruption like prohibition's ban on sale of liquor, widespread disregard for the law among citizens. The kingpin of the lottery world was a man named Eddie Guyall, whose Bug business was called the Home Company. Guyall, a native of New Orleans, had been around town for years, starting as a tire salesman. He first showed up in the Atlanta newspapers in 1927, accused of striking the manager of the fashionable Peachtree Gardens nightclub in the head with a blackjack. In New Orleans, Guyall, who was described as small of build and unassuming, had developed a taste for betting on racehorses. Selling tires just didn't provide the lifestyle he sought. So he launched a bootleg liquor business out of a downtown hotel, and from there moved into the lucrative Bug franchise, joining with another gangster, former bootleg, Walter Cutcliffe, who was described as having a broad, winning smile and a pair of large fists. Their business, the Home Company, would eventually generate $1 million a year in annual gross income. So these are big businesses. In 1935, Ed Rivers was elected governor, and Guyall was wealthy, living in a large house on Pelham Road in Atlanta's fashionable Morningside neighborhood. The house is still over there. I don't know if you've ever been over there, but it's an extremely nice neighborhood. Guyall and his wife Myrtle, who was described as dark-haired and attractive, had been married for 9 years. Second marriage for both. Had no children. Guyall owned 2 horses, fast steppers, that he raced in Miami and New Orleans. He would routinely bet $1,000 on a single horse race. Remember, this was the middle of the Depression. Life was good, perhaps too good for the liking of its bug competitors. 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, April 23rd, Guile and his wife were in their big golden sedan in the driveway of their home, preparing to go out for an after dinner drive. The family cook was inside the house, as was the interior decorator, who was reupholstering the slipcovers on the furniture. Guile's German Shepherd was normally chained in the yard, but he had disappeared mysteriously a few weeks earlier. A white man wearing a dark suit and hat suddenly appeared beside the passenger window, bent down to go look at Guile. He then straightened up, and Mrs. Guile saw that he was holding a big, dark-looking gun. The window glasses rolled down. Mrs. Guile, believing this to be a robbery, fell over her husband, started removing the rings from her fingers. But this was not a robbery, it was an assassination. And you got it coming to you, government said. Firing a shot into the right side, Guile's face, killing him. In his right coat pocket, Guile had $2,233 in cash, which was equivalent to $37,000 in today's dollars. And that was one day's take. And after Guile was shot, the money was discovered scattered on the floorboard of the car. Mrs. Guile's first phone call was not to the police, but to the White Lantern Sandwich Shop on 12th and Peachtree Streets, where lottery operators Cutcliffe typically congregated. Alerted to the shooting by Mrs. Guile, Cutcliffe arrived on the scene before the police got there. He put Guile in the backseat of his Hudson sedan and rushed him to St. Joseph's Hospital. The weeping Mrs. Guile, sitting in the front seat, leaning over to comfort her husband, but it was no use, he was dead. Anyway, the guy who killed Blucher was pardoned by Rivers, of course. So that, and many other bug operators were as well. That just goes to show you kind of the 1930s gangster element that was so prevalent back then. Rivers were in the middle of it. And the Klan. So.
I'm going down to the bottom, let the hammer rain. I'm just to rain my hammer, let your hammer rain. Oh, just to rain.